Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Gates of Huldah. In today's session, I want to highlight some of the atrocities that the Negroes survived as we commemorate 400 years of our ancestors coming to this land. Yes, August 2019 serves as a marker in time to say that a crime was committed against our people 400 years ago. Do you remember the Tonka truck? When my son was small, that was the go-to truck for little boys. Why? Because it had a reputation for being tough. It was built to last. How is that truck like the Negro? Now, if you haven't heard about the true history of the Negro, be sure to listen to sessions 1 through 4, Negro Find Out Who You Really Are. There's a link in the top right corner that you can click on and it will direct you to that series. So let's get started on today's lesson. Negro, you were built to last. As we take a look back, this picture is a good reminder of how our ancestors were chained and shackled, how they were muzzled. They had the yoke of irons around their neck, and they labored from sun up to sundown. So you may ask, why do we keep reminding ourselves about slavery? You know, when Moses told the children of Israel that they needed to always be in remembrance of their deliverance, of how the Most High had delivered them and brought them out of the land of Egypt. It was so they could remember His might and His power and know that He was the one true God. But unfortunately, they did not do that. That memory was not passed down through the generations. And when you don't remember where you came from, chances are you'll end up back there. And that is certainly what happened to us when we forgot the Most High. It caused us to be brought to this land 400 years ago as slaves. It's a time of remembrance.
The Middle Passage was a very brutal and difficult experience for enslaved Africans.
Leg irons like these were used to stop any African slaves from moving around. As you can see, that would be hammered into there by a blacksmith once the foot had been put through. These were absolutely necessary in places like the Middle Passage, where you had slaves who were struggling to be free, which they were at all times. I think we tend to forget that, that these people were fighting every step of the way.
I have with me a document from the slave register in St. Kitts, and this shows a list of the names that were given to the Africans. Their African names were removed. And one of these names is Nobody. He's written down a 14-year-old boy. His job is to look after the cattle, and he's written down as Nobody. I've seen other names like this too, like Gift or Property.
The slave trade developed out of the need for labour in the Americas to grow sugar, and it developed into what was known as the triangular trade, and ships from places like Liverpool went out to the coast of West Africa taking goods which were then traded on the coast for enslaved Africans.
It is an absolute fact that America was built on the backs of free slave labor. And you have some who would say, well, emancipation made everything better for the slaves. But did it?
Even emancipation didn't truly free the slaves. Freedom freed slaves for more travail. The end of the Civil War found many cast adrift without skills and no place to go. And the Yankees who freed them weren't always seen as benevolent liberators.
I remember when the Yankees come along and took all the good horses and sold all the meat and flour and sugar and stuff out in the river and let it go down the river. And they know the people wouldn't have nothing to live on, but they done that.
The ex-slaves left one hell for another, perhaps an even more dangerous one. No longer property, they didn't have the protections afforded property.
When we were slaves, we couldn't do that, see? And if we got free, we didn't know nothing to do. And my mother, she hunted places and bound us out for $1 a month. But we didn't have no property, we didn't have no home. We had nowhere, nothing. We didn't have nothing on it, just like the cattle. We just turned out and get along the best you could.
So emancipation really didn't help the slaves. After they were freed, supposedly freed, the United States government just came up with another way to exploit them. That's when you had things like black codes and Jim Crow. These things started happening, and then it led to the prison industrial complex. So were the slaves really free? We've also been exploited in the music industry. This article says how race records turned black music into big business. The recordings, which became a national phenomenon, captured artists like Bessie Smith and Louis Armstrong, but most artists were exploited and forgotten. How has the repeated hate crimes impacted us? This article says Hispanic and black populations have a higher risk of becoming victims of race or ethnicity-motivated violent hate crimes compared to non-Hispanic whites, according to a new study from the University of Washington that looked at the risk and health impacts of these types of crimes. Model estimates of victimization for blacks range from 30 to 40% higher and 10 to 60% higher for Hispanic. These crimes against blacks tended to be more violent, usually involving a weapon or firearm, and resulted in higher rates of injuries and medical care compared to other races and ethnic groups. It was proven that the CIA actually planted drugs in black communities. This article said for nearly a decade, the CIA helped spread crack cocaine in black ghettos. It says, according to a series of groundbreaking reports by the San Jose Mercury News, for the better part of a decade, a San Francisco Bay Area drug ring comprised of CIA and U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency agents and informants sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and Blood street gangs of Los Angeles. Almost daily we get reports telling us that black students are lagging far behind their white counterparts. The disparity in education has been used as an opportunity to highlight how far behind they are. But isn't it time to tell the whole story? This article tells us that non-white school districts get $23 billion less funding than white ones. Let's read and see what they say. The researchers at EdBuild calculated that racially concentrated non-white districts receive, on average, only $11,682 of funding per student in comparison to $13,908 for racially concentrated white districts. Collectively, this means that, as Ed Build notes, non-white school districts receive $23 billion less than white districts, despite serving the same number of students. Often less reported are articles like this. The question is asked, what if the Asian-white achievement gap were treated the same as the white-black gap? Why is it that the Asian-white achievement gap gets no attention compared to the extensive and widespread attention the white-black achievement gap gets, even though the gap for math SAT scores has been growing for Asians versus whites since 1996, while it's been stable for white versus black for the last 20 years? Why is that? When you look at these results, you have to wonder, why aren't they reporting this type of information? Because I've often wondered, why would we compare a group that has been discriminated against and prevented from receiving quality education to a group that has not experienced those challenges? Wouldn't a better comparison be to compare white students to Asian students? Then you would be comparing apples to apples. How can you prove supremacy over another group when unfair rules are put in place to ensure that you will win? But when you compare Asians who have not had the struggles of blacks to whites, what do the results show? When others see failure, we should see progress. Listen to this report. Gains in high school graduation rates mask persistent gaps in post-secondary education enrollment for students of color. According to data released on December 4th by the U.S. Department of Education, the national high school graduation rate hit a new all-time high of 84.1% for the class of 2016. The data represented an increase of nearly 1 percentage point compared to the 83.2% rate posted by the class of 2015. So what does this mean? As shown in the table below, all student subgroups have posted increases over the last 5 years, with African American students, Latino students, and students with limited English proficiency posting the largest gains. As a result, graduation rate gaps between white students and African American students have narrowed from 17 percentage points in 2012 to 11.9 percentage points in 2016. So again, when others see failure, we should see progress. When we take everything into consideration, the fact that our people are progressing despite the odds says that we can achieve. It takes more strength and endurance to come from behind. When you're forced to run 10 miles, why would you even compare yourself to someone who only had to run a mile? You have more to make up for. So the fact that we're still in the race says that we're built to last. Let's also remember the practices that were put in place to systematically wipe out our people. Francis Galton was an Englishman, and his family became very wealthy from slave labor. He coined the term eugenics. Let's see what he says about the Negro. He says, "I do not join in the belief that the African is our equal in brain or in heart. I do not think that the average Negro cares for his liberty as much as an Englishman or as a self-born Russian, and I believe that if we can in any fair way possess ourselves of his services, we have an equal right to utilize them to our advantages." So, as a result, what happened? In order to promote the idea of eugenics, a eugenics society was formed. It was galvanized the social movement that began in America with the sole intent of wiping out the black population through selective breeding and sterilization. In secret, it played a significant role in the culture of the United States prior to its involvement in World War II. Today, it's more recognizable, and institutions like Planned Parenthood are advancing the eugenics movement against the black community. This passage from Exodus 1:8-16 show a lot of similarities with what happened to the ancient children of Israel in the land of Egypt to what has happened to us in this land. Let's read this. It says, "Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live." Just think about all of the things that were designed to totally destroy and annihilate our people. We had the church and state working together to enact ungodly laws. We had the hate crimes, of course, slavery, the rape and brutality of that, exploitation, the whitewashing of our history, eugenics, abortion, the drug epidemic. All of these things were designed to destroy us. All of the things that led to discrimination. 400 years later, we're still here. One thing we know is that we have a promise. Jeremiah 30:16-17 says, "But all who devour you will be devoured. All your enemies will go into exile. Those who plunder you will be plundered. All who make spoil of you I will despoil. But I will restore you to health and heal your wounds, declares the Lord, because you are called an outcast, Zion, for whom no one cares." In 1689, John Locke began talking about perfect freedom. He said that all human beings enjoyed what he called perfect freedom, the right to enjoy their persons and properties as they think fit. He goes on to say, there being nothing more evident than that creatures of the same species and rank, promiscuously born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal one amongst another, without subordination or subjection, unless the Lord and Master of them all should by any manifest declaration of his will set one above another, and confer on him by an evident and clear appointment an undoubted right to dominion and sovereignty. And this sounds great, doesn't it? However, John Locke was fighting for slavery and colonialism. So this shows the hypocrisy of the leaders of the day, the religious leaders and lawmakers, who on one hand, they were saying that all men should have the right to perfect freedom, yet they withheld this right from the Negroes.
John Henry Falk may have experienced the most profound effect. He was a graduate student when he interviewed the former slaves, including the two women you hear in this broadcast. Himself interviewed just before he died in 1979, Falk was going on about how he believed in giving blacks the right to go to school, giving them the right to vote, giving them the right to go into anything they qualified for. And then he said he experienced an epiphany. Yes.
Indeed, how can you give someone something that they had already been given by their Creator? Hebrews 5:8 says, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Now we know this is speaking about the Messiah, and it's talking about the things he had to endure for the sin of man. He died so that we could have life and have it more abundantly. And we can all receive that life through faith. It doesn't matter your color, your nationality, your sex. It does not matter. You receive salvation through faith. But it says he learned obedience by the things he suffered. Have we learned the lesson as a result of the things we suffered? 400 years have we learned a lesson in that period of time? I would hate to think that we have not learned that there is only one true God, that we are nothing apart from him. I would hope that we would have learned the lesson that we are in this condition because of the sin, the paganism, the rebellion, the idolatry. We went from being the head to becoming the tail because we refused to repent. Have we learned our lesson? Negroes, or should I say Hebrews, you're like that Tonka truck. By the grace of the Most High, you have endured everything the enemy threw at you. He wanted to destroy you. Why? He was afraid of your strength. He didn't want you to be strong. But what the enemy didn't know is that the Most High was using the struggle for our good. We owe our very existence to Him. And we're His portion. He chose us. And in spite of our mess-ups and failures, guess what? What the world sees as failure, He sees as progress